money, then roll number. Black card is my business card, the way it be setting the tone for me. I don't need a brag, but I be like, put it in the bag, yeah. When you see the max, they stack up like my ass, yeah. Shoot, go from the south to the booth, make it all back in one loop. Give me the loot, never mind, I got a juice.
Hello everyone, good morning. Thanks for joining our presentation. My name is Tytus Kurek. I'm a product manager at Canonical, and this is Alessandro Pilotti, CEO at Cloudbase Solutions. And today together we are going to talk about the migration from VMware to Charmed OpenStack. We're going to navigate through the following topics. We'll talk briefly about a comparison between VMware and OpenStack, and we'll tell you how does Charmed OpenStack differ from other OpenStacks available there. And then we'll move to the economics, which is usually a key driver, a key motivation behind the migration process from VMware to OpenStack. The presentation will follow with a demo in which Alessandro will demonstrate Coriolis, a migration tool from Cloudbase Solutions, which assists with the migration process from VMware to OpenStack. And then we'll summarize what we've learned in this presentation, and we'll open the Q&A session. So before we get started, let's answer a simple question. So why not VMware? Why not just a virtualization platform? So more than 10 years ago, organizations have started moving out from their traditional IT, monolithic IT organization. And the whole pets versus cattle model, the TCO, the total cost of ownership associated with maintaining all of those pets was constantly growing. So they started moving to virtual machines, and many chose VMware as their virtualization platform because they were hoping moving to VMware is going to reduce the TCO. But unfortunately, due to the costs associated with VMware licensing, support and subscription, professional services, many were observing that the TCO keeps growing again instead of going down. So in search of alternative solutions, many organizations have started adopting OpenStack. So let's talk more about OpenStack now, and how does OpenStack differ from VMware, and how does Charmed OpenStack differ from other OpenStacks available on the market today. So if we take a look on what does VMware provide nowadays, it is called VMware's vRealize, and if we compare VMware vRealize suite to the Charmed OpenStack suite, there are obviously a lot of differences. And there are various components. We can try to compare them based on the certain features. So, for example, with regards to the hypervisor management, in VMware, this is vCenter Server. In Charmed OpenStack, this is OpenStack built-in component, Nova. The same applies to the self-service portal. So in VMware, this is vRealize Automation compared to OpenStack Horizon. But what really makes Charmed OpenStack different from other OpenStacks available there is Juju, which is an open source tool developed and maintained by Canonical, which provides the orchestration and application deployment capabilities. With regards to the monitoring and log management, we offer so-called LMA stack, which consists of ELK, Greylog, Prometheus, Nagios, like all of those best tools, which provide the LMA capabilities. We do not actually offer any proprietary billing solution, but we provide an integration with third-party tools. And getting back to the VMware versus Charmed OpenStack comparison, what really makes a difference is the variety of hypervisor and SDN choices. So VMware provides a hypervisor and SDN solution that it brings. It's called ESXi and NSX, respectively. While in Charmed OpenStack, you can get both KVM and Hyper-V hypervisors running. And with regards to the SDN, it's really an SDN solution of your choice. We support a variety of SDN solutions available. So at this point, someone may ask a question. So what about the VMware integrated OpenStack? So VMware provides an integrated OpenStack, but there are still some drawbacks of using it, and there are still some challenges with using it. So first of all, it's vendor lock-in. It is still being run on VMware, right? It adds more complexity to complex enough environments. So this VMware vRealize suite is complex enough, and now you have OpenStack on top of it, so it's another layer of complexity. You do not really benefit from the reduced cost, because the costs associated with licensing and support and subscription professional services still apply. And you do not really benefit from other features of Charmed OpenStack as well. So let's talk more about that now. So what does make Charmed OpenStack different from other OpenStacks available on the market? Well, there's plenty of things, but there are 5 important things to remember. So first of all, there is a variety of technology choices, and we've briefly talked about that when talking about the hypervisor and SDN solutions available. But the same applies to storage, the same applies to the integration tools like Coriolis, for example. So we believe that what makes most sense is to choose open source tools which from various projects, not necessarily OpenStack, like we're using Ceph, for example, and use such tools which bring the most business value to our Charmed OpenStack offering. The second thing is a predictable release cadence. So OpenStack gets released every 6 months, and its releases are usually tied to the Ubuntu releases. And the Charmed OpenStack gets available in 2 weeks after the official upstream release. So the release cadence is predictable, and the upgrade path, the same applies to the upgrade path, it's predictable as well. The third thing is velocity of development and innovation. So the OpenStack Charms project focuses on making OpenStack deployable, maintainable, upgradable, but we adopt those OpenStack projects which are mature and which we consider bring a high business value. So there are a lot of OpenStack projects which are currently available as OpenStack Charms. The fourth thing are simplified deployments and operations thanks to Juju Charms. So if you haven't heard about Juju Charms before, Juju Charms are kind of a collection of scripts and metadata which contain all necessary logic required to install, configure, interconnect, and operate applications. So not only OpenStack deployments get simplified, but its daily operational tasks as well. So things like OpenStack upgrades, for example, become pretty easy thanks to the usage of Juju Charms. And finally, last but not least, economics is behind all of the behind the migration process, right? So let's talk more about the economics now, and how does the migration from VMware to Charmed OpenStack help you to reduce both CapEx and OpEx costs. So let's consider a sample cost scenario. Let's say we're going to host 2,500 of virtual machines on 50 physical servers, and the number of CPUs per server is 4, like a typical commodity hardware for the compute, I would say. The annual VM growth rate is 0%. So this is our cost scenario. And now, if we take those data and put them in so-called VMware vRealize Suite Return on Investment Calculator, which is available at the URL provided, so we can play with various numbers after this presentation. We can see that the costs associated, especially with VMware licensing, but also support and subscription and professional services, are pretty high in such a small environment. If we put all of those numbers together, this is over $2 million. It's pretty significant. So let's now try to compare that to the Charmed OpenStack offering for the same cost scenario. So first of all, there is no licensing cost. OpenStack is an open source project, so the licensing costs do not apply. Secondly, the costs of professional services are lower. They vary from 75 to 150 of thousands of dollars, depending on the complexity of your cloud environment you're going to implement and certain features that you would like to see in your OpenStack deployment. Even the training costs are lower. This is less significant, but another thing which is important is the support and subscription costs. And the reason there is a difference here is that VMware applies per CPU model for the support, while Charmed OpenStack applies per node model for the support. So this is what helps you to bring the cost down. And now if we compare those two numbers in the row in the bottom, the migration from VMware to Charmed OpenStack can actually help you to reduce the cost by an order of magnitude, which is amazing. So if we take a look on that from the 5 years perspective, this is even more evident than maintaining the VMware virtualization platform is much more costly compared to maintaining a Charmed OpenStack cloud environment. So now I'm going to hand over to Alessandro, who's going to give you an introduction to Coriolis and perform a demo.
Thank you, Tytus. Okay, so I will introduce a little bit Coriolis. As Tytus was mentioning, this is going to be a demo showing how to perform a migration from a VMware environment, from a VMware vSphere to an OpenStack, specifically a Charmed OpenStack. But it's, let's say, it can apply also to any of your OpenStack deployments that you guys might have. I am doing a live demo. So this demo is running through the wireless from the conference, and from there through VPN to our data centers in Europe. So crossing fingers that the demo gods are going to be kind with us today. If not, no problem, because I have anyway also a video in case it shouldn't work. So what you're seeing here is the Coriolis UI. So let me introduce a little bit the concepts to begin with. What you see here are the so-called cloud endpoints, okay? So what you do to begin with is to choose from where you are migrating from and where you are migrating to, okay? So those are called cloud endpoints. So there is the source and the destination. In our case, of course, the source is going to be this particular VMware environment, okay? And then the destination is going to be this particular OpenStack environment called Canonical over there, which is a Charmed OpenStack, as I mentioned before. You can see it also from the list. Then we can have also different type of clouds and everything. For example, if I click on one of them, I will see all the details specifically to that particular endpoint, which means what is needed to connect to the underlying APIs. It's very important, Coriolis doesn't need you to install anything inside of the individual virtual machines that you're trying to migrate, but just connects to the underlying cloud or virtualization solution. So what do you need in this case? For vSphere, you simply need to have a username, a password, a host, which is simply the endpoint of your vSphere, vCenter controller, or it could be also directly in SXI if you want, but let's say in most cases it's going to be, of course, a vSphere. And if you have self-signed certificates for your HTTPS endpoint, you can also allow that, okay? Which is our case right now. You can validate the endpoint to make sure it's also enabled. The OpenStack one, just to make a comparison, has OpenStack specific endpoints information, like for example, your user domain name, authentication URL, which is of course your Keystone endpoint, project domain name, project name, username, password, and so on. So the same identical information that you will need to connect to Horizon or to use the command line interface in OpenStack. Okay, so nothing more than that. If you want to create a new one, all you have to do is to, of course, to go here, say new endpoint, and then you choose the type of endpoint. As you can see, we support quite a large number of clouds like AWS, OpenStack, VMware, Microsoft Azure, and Azure Stack, Hyper-V, System Center, OCI, OCI Classic for the Oracle side, and Oracle VM, plus there are some more, okay? So those are various options. Then once you click on one of them, it will ask you all the endpoint information I mentioned before. And so it's very simple and guided, okay? And also you can have the equivalent command line option if you prefer to automate everything, okay? Very important, Coriolis has a REST API. So this is a graphical user interface that sits in front of the REST API, but you can also have the command line interface, as I mentioned before, or you can integrate it directly to the API in a third-party product. Some customer of ours do that. Now, the time, of course, to perform an entire migration is limited in this particular context, like of a session of 40 minutes, right? So what we have is that we pre-created what we called a replica. A replica consists simply in the information needed to move your data from the source to the destination, in this case of a single VM, but it could more than one VM, which will allow you to transfer in an incremental way all the content of the virtual machine. How does it work? I will actually start one of them first, okay? And then while it actually executes, I'm gonna talk over it so we spare some time. So let's take, for example, this one, which is called, it's a virtual machine called Test Coriolis Ubuntu 18.04. So the guest operating system can be pretty much anything. In this particular demo, I'm using an Ubuntu guest VM, but it could be Linux, any supported Windows version, Red Hat, CentOS, Oracle Linux, SUSE, and Fedora, many more, okay? This is my VMware source endpoint. So here is actually my VM. As you can see, it's actually running in this particular moment. I just get into the web console. It's a test cluster, so. Okay. And as you can see, this is my console. Just a second that I'm editing some text. Why am I doing this? So I can show you that I'm actually editing something in the VM. Then I replicating the data, and you will find this content that I just edited on the target in OpenStack. It's hard to type, of course, with a microphone. So just a moment. Okay. Especially exiting VI with one hand, it's complicated. Okay. So as you can see, we have this text called sh.txt, hello Shanghai. So the VM is running as I mentioned, and here it's our particular environment. I can click on it so we can see where it comes from and everything. So you see from VMware to the Canonical OpenStack, which is actually here. In this moment, I don't have any VM running here, okay? So I go back here and I click execute replica. And while this actually goes, I can start talking about what happens. Coriolis is connecting to the source environment. So what you're seeing here are a set of tasks which are being executed, in which Coriolis knows that it has to connect to the VMware endpoint, get information about the virtual machine. Since we already replicated the content of this virtual machine, it will find out that there are already disks on the target from the same size. So there is no need to create new disks. It will validate all the content on the source and destination. As you can see, all the tasks are quickly moving. All these tasks are either parallelized when it's possible to run them in parallel, or in sequence when, of course, they have to be, one depends on another one, okay? We're getting close to the clue part. Now, for example, what is happening is that we are spinning up a temporary virtual machine on the target environment. So this is all automated, okay? This temporary virtual machine will be used to attach the volumes, one for every disk, virtual disk, for example, from the source VM. And we will create a channel from Coriolis to this virtual machine, and we will transfer data over this channel inside of this disk, okay? The reason is pretty simple, is that in many clouds, including OpenStack, you cannot just create, for example, a Cinder volume, because those are Cinder volumes, and just say, hey, I want to write some data at this particular offset inside there, okay? So that's why we need to mount it to this particular virtual machine, and then from inside the virtual machine, we simply see the virtual space. So we are able to simply write our data wherever we want, okay? Okay, all good. We are waiting for the connectivity. It passed. So the temporary VM got spun up. We got a public IP, which is reachable by Coriolis. All this thing can be configured, of course. We are attaching all the volumes, as I mentioned before. Let me scroll down a bit. And now, as soon as this finishes, the interesting thing starts here, replicating disks. What's happening now? We are taking a snapshot of the source virtual machine, creating a snapshot. This is a change block tracking snapshot in the case of VMware. CBT is a technology that VMware has for backup applications and similar, in which you can actually take incremental snapshots and knowing what data changed from the last time that you had a snapshot. In this particular case, you can see that the virtual machine has the disk of a given size, but we have only a few megabytes to transfer. You can see the progress going on there. It was so fast that it's already finished. But the whole virtual machine will have been 8 gigabytes, okay? While the amount of data that changed since the last time I executed that was only 100 megabytes, so it was super fast, okay? The first time, of course, it takes more time. Obviously, during a session or during 20 minutes here, I cannot perform an entire replication because it takes more time because it has to transfer all the data across VMware and OpenStack, right? So super fast. When we finish, we just delete all the temporary data that we created, and we find ourselves with a complete copy, up to date, of our virtual disks inside of OpenStack, okay? This is very important. These snapshots, since it's VMware, are also crash consistent and app consistent, because the technology that VMware uses, if you have the VMware tools installed, allows you, of course, to talk to the guest operating system and the applications running in it, which are aware, of course, of this process, and being able to put the application data in a consistent state. For example, if it's a Windows VM, it's interacting with VSS, which is a technology from Microsoft, which is supported, for example, from the base operating system, by SQL Server, by Oracle, and many other application, Exchange, and so on. So the applications know, for example, the databases know that a snapshot is in progress, and they ensure that the actual data file are consistent. This is so-called app consistency, which means that when I restart the target environment from a backup, or in this case from a replication, it will be in a state in which the application just works. The opposite is called crash consistency, in which is the equivalent of taking a computer, pressing the power button, shutting it down brutally, like pulling the plug, and restarting it, which will be the equivalent of taking a point-in-time snapshot without any of those technologies. Okay. They're still consistent, meaning I don't get a point in which I take half of the disk in one moment and half in another moment. So it's still a snapshot in time, but it doesn't necessarily have the app consistency I mentioned before. So thanks to this technology in VMware, we have all this particular information. Okay, don't worry about that, it's just a timeout. Good. Now, so this thing finished, so it's time to perform migration. So now the data is inside of the disks on the target, but we didn't migrate. So now comes one of the most interesting parts of the process. Let's see if we have to log in again. I am performing the migration from the replicated disks. So in this moment, the machine on the VMware side is still running, but we don't particularly care. We don't particularly care because all the data is already on the OpenStack side. So this is also the core, by the way, of our disaster recovery as a service feature. Now the migration started, and it goes to similar steps to the ones we mentioned before. Validating the environment, getting an optimal flavor, creating the disk snapshots. I will get there in a moment. What does get optimal flavor mean? You have two options. You come from VMware, where you have an environment in which you can create very virtual machines with how much memory you want, how many virtual disks and virtual CPUs and so on. And you go to a cloud like OpenStack, in which you have flavors. So you cannot just say, I want 3.5 gigs of RAM. You need a flavor with that particular size, right? So either you specify for this particular virtual machine, I want exactly this particular amount, this particular flavor, or you can let Coriolis choose one for you, which is what we did. So Coriolis simply listing all the flavors which are accessible by your tenant and say, oh, this is the minimum flavor, which is including all the amount of memory that I need and all the amount of vCPUs, okay? So it's up to you. You can either let Coriolis do that or select it manually. Again, we are spinning up another temporary virtual machine. We call them internally minions, but they're basically temporary resources which are spinned up on the target cloud. You don't need to take care of those. It's all automated by Coriolis. And Coriolis always, when it finishes, whether successfully or not, it always cleans up after itself. So those temporary VMs get deleted all the time. So there is no risk that you end up with some leftovers here and there. Now, it already started. We're waiting for the connectivity over there. And then this particular process called OS Morphing will start. As you can see, it's already up. We are attaching the volumes. In this case, it's just one, but it will be one for every disk from this particular VM. Actually, it has two volumes, this one, sorry. And afterwards, we're going to start. I will talk about that when it begins. The challenge of the OS morphing is important because we move from something like VMware or any other hypervisor into a different one. In this case, KVM, but it could be Hyper-V or something else, right? So it's a completely different hardware. So this particular virtual machine has to run over there. If you ever tried to take, for example, a hard disk from a laptop or a PC back in the day and move it to another one, when it starts, very often it doesn't start because it misses completely the kernel modules or the Windows drivers for that particular environment. It applies also to virtual hardware like in clouds. For example, moving from let's say VMware to OpenStack means having to do a set of operations for running on top of KVM. Removing, for example, the VMware tools that you don't need, installing Cloud Init, in some cases, depending on operating system, rebuilding the init RDs to make sure that your init RD images contain all the kernel modules specifically for the virtual devices that you're going to use there. Reconfiguring networking if needed, reconfiguring SE Linux. So there are a lot of steps, okay? You can see here being performed. The first part is the discovery. So Coriolis simply mounted all these disks, looks into these disks and say, oh, I found an Ubuntu 18.04, or oh, I found a RHEL 7, or oh, I found a Windows Server 2016, okay? And then the next steps are specific to that. As you can see, okay, it's already finished, but I can go back to and show you the task. OS being migrated, removing packages, adding packages, dismounting OS partitions. So this was relatively quick, okay? Other operating systems take more time for that, but it's still a fairly quick process. Now, we are deleting the OS morphing resources. So all these temporary VMs I talked about, and we are gonna start the finalized machine. So we're simply shutting down, dismounting the volumes, and spinning up a VM using those volumes, okay? So you will end up finding your target machine up and running with the data I mentioned before. Let's see if we can. Okay. As you can see, it's going to be spawned up right now. You see? If I go back to Coriolis, as you can see, it finalized and then it deletes the snapshots. By the way, why do we use snapshots? This is very important because the replica volumes that we already moved over there, if we just use them to perform the replica, so perform the final migration, sorry, it means that we cannot perform again the replica without starting from scratch in case we want to remigrate for whatever reason on the machine. It's very important, especially in disaster recovery strategies, to periodically validate your migration procedures and recovery procedures, which means that you can spin up, as I mentioned before, by migrating the machine without touching the replicated disk, but taking a snapshot and booting actually out of those snapshots, basically creating volumes from those snapshots. And validate it, say, okay, my application works as is expected, exactly like under source, then you can kill it and continue, okay? So I'm periodically performing this work. Or if you're migrating hundreds or thousands of VMs, you might want to make sure that everything works, and only at the last minute you shut down the source VMs. Because don't forget that in this particular moment, if I go on this sphere, my machine over there is still running. So my users theoretically are still using that. So I can, as part of the migration process, I can say, hey, perform a final replica, shut down automatically my source VM, move the last bits, and start the target. So that also depends on how much downtime you're intending to afford. So we have customers who say, let both machines running, I don't care. Some say, don't worry, shut it off and then take your time to migrate. And others say, I need to have the minimum amount of time intercurring between stopping one and starting the other, okay? So Coriolis will help you in all of these cases. Machine is up and running, as I mentioned before. Migration completed successfully. And if I look here, this is my test VM, okay? And here it is, okay? So you can see it up and running. It's the same environment as before. I think we have a couple of minutes still, with which I can show you quickly how to create actually a replica from scratch. So normally the process you perform is this one. You select new. The typical step will be new replica, as you already have the endpoints. Next, you select your source environment, for example, VMware in this case. Then you provide some information about your source environment. Okay, what version of the disk you need and stuff like that. Automatically enabling change block tracking. So if your VM doesn't have CBT enabled, Coriolis can enable it for you. Things like this. Then Coriolis will connect to vSphere in this case and list all the virtual machines which are running there. From here, you can select one or more virtual machines which are here. So let's say, for example, I filter by name, and I will say Ubuntu. Here are a bunch of Ubuntu VMs. I can select one or more. Why one or more? Because our goal is to migrate automatically entire workloads. So if your application is made of more than one virtual machine, you select them all together here. So your entire replica and migration process will migrate all of them at once, not just one, okay? But in the minimum case, you can just say, well, I just select one of them, right? Next, I select my target. I have, in this particular case, in this demo environment, I have two OpenStack configured. One is Hyper-C, and one is the canonical Charmed OpenStack that you just saw. Or I can select any of the others. Then here I can write, I just give it a name. I can have the option here of shutting down already the instances when the migration happens, right? When the replica happens, sorry. And I can provide a bunch of advanced information like what flavor, network details, how the temporary VMs have spun up. So lots of small details. All these things have their own defaults in the configuration file, so you don't need to do it all the time, right? But it's important that Coriolis lets you, let's say, perform any level of granularity in the configurations that you need. The next step is extremely important, and it's related to selecting the mapping between the networks. It's found out that this particular VM is connected to a particular vSwitch called VM network, and it says, well, I found a bunch of virtual networks on the OpenStack side. Which one do you want? And if you will have more than one, you will have it here. Same thing with the data stores, disk mapping, and so on, because you might have different Cinder volumes behind, Cinder volume drivers. You can set a schedule, so when you want to run this particular replica, how often, like daily, it is like a cron job, okay, just to give an idea of the thing. You might want to run it every hour, as continuously as you can get, once a week, only in the weekends, because migration is, of course, strictly, you have to take into consideration, of course, your networking limitations, because you cannot migrate, of course, 10,000 VMs at once if you have a 1 gigabit link, okay? So we don't particularly care about this. So we can go next, and this will be the end. And then if I click finish, the replica will be created and started, and we go back to the particular environment you saw before. Okay. So I just click finish, so we can also finish the demo here. It's creating the replica. Replica successfully created. Okay, I believe we have a few minutes and it start executing, but of course we're not waiting for this to finish, okay? You can anytime look at the status of all your replicas, migrations, cloud endpoints, and information like projects and users. Very important, Coriolis uses Keystone behind for all the authentication and identity management, and also Barbican for saving secrets. You can either have it standalone in a single appliance. You can easily then deploy, for example, in your VMware or OpenStack or other cloud, so all in one to say so, or you can integrate also all the services in your existing OpenStack cloud. I think that closes our demo. Questions and answers, or then Q&A?
Yeah, thank you, Alessandro.
Okay.
I think that was an amazing introduction to Coriolis. So we're short on time, so we're going to just briefly go through the takeaways from this presentation.
Okay, so that will be your full screen, right? Okay.
So things to remember, migrating from VMware to OpenStack is cost effective and will increase flexibility, but you have to ensure that the OpenStack distribution that you choose is easily deployable, easily upgradable, maintainable, and this is where Canonical's Charmed OpenStack comes in, reducing the costs and boosting the efficiency. Coriolis obviously provides the migration capabilities from VMware to OpenStack. One thing to mention at the end is the latest development effort at Canonical. MicroStack is an OpenStack in a snap. It can be installed with a single command, just like that. So you can try it even after this presentation. And you can find more information about MicroStack at microstack.run website. If you have any questions, I don't think we really have time for that now because we're short on time, but we are available. You can find us at the booth in the marketplace, so you can come to the Ubuntu booth and you can come to the Cloudbase booth if you have any questions, either about Charmed OpenStack, MicroStack, or Coriolis. So
I think we still have 1 minute. Can we have one or two questions?
Go.
Okay, one. Good.
Yeah, good morning, sir. I'm Jack from Reti. I have a question. I'm sure the VMware is not very happy when they are heard this information. Hope there is a VMware audience in this room. It's a joke, yeah. I have a question. This tool is awesome solution and software, but my question is, if someone running the some application which is it's illegal with some license, but it's migrate the VMware to OpenStack. Maybe it's illegal about the license. The license only for the VMware or one one application. If the replication to migrate to another server or another machine, maybe it's illegal. So my question is how to handle the illegal issue for the enterprise. Okay, thank you.
Oh, well, that's a quite complex, the question requires a fairly complex answer. The short one is that Coriolis, it automates the migration itself. The validation for the licensing and everything is done by other tools. For example, in the case of Windows, the Cloudbase init will start and can reprovision the licensing by applying a license key, which you can use with SPLA or whatever you might have there. So the specific licensing applies to the virtual machine themselves and do no physical nodes you're running. So that's outside of the scope, if you want, of what Coriolis does. But if you want to continue, we can meet at the booth and happily go on. I think we have to close here. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.